There are places in the world where you can get lost. And then there's Alaska. Alaska isn't just big. It's not just remote. It's not just cold. It is a vast beyond comprehension. Miles without roads, days without cell service, skies so wide they make you feel small, just from standing under them. From the air, it looks empty. From the ground, it feels watchful. This is a land where the map lies to you, where distance isn't measured in miles, but in endurance. Where help isn't on the way, because sometimes there is no way. In Alaska, people don't always leave footprints. And when they do, the land doesn't promise to keep them. Hunters vanish between camps. Hikers step off a trail and are never seen again. Planes disappear into clear skies without ever sending a distress call. No wreckage, no bodies, no answers, just silence. Entire villages have been found abandoned, meals left behind, doors unlocked, fires gone cold. Places where people lived for generations simply emptied, as if something whispered that it was time to go. And in the wilderness, far from towns, far from lights, there are stories of voices calling your name, not shouting, not threatening, just familiar. A voice that sounds like someone you trust, someone you'd follow. Alaska doesn't chase you. It doesn't need to. It waits. The cold doesn't kill you quickly. The darkness doesn't rush. The terrain doesn't warn you before it turns. This is a place where the rules change. Where the wilderness doesn't care if you're experienced, prepared, or careful. Because Alaska doesn't just hide things, it keeps them. Tonight we're stepping into a state where disappearances aren't rare, they're expected. Where survival stories are miracles. And where some locals will tell you the land itself decides who gets to leave. People vanish without explanation. Communities walk away without warning. And something calls from the trees when no one else is around. In Alaska, the silence isn't empty. It's listening. Welcome to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. For the next hour, we're traveling to the furthest edges of the map, into frozen wilderness, missing persons cases that refuse to close, and the unsettling idea that Alaska isn't dangerous because it's empty, but because it's not. So lower the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't follow the voices. Before Alaska was mapped, before borders, statehood, or settlement, people were already here. For thousands of years, indigenous nations lived on this land. The Inuit, Yupik, Tlingit, and many others, each with their own languages, traditions, and relationships with the land. These weren't cultures built on conquest. They were built on survival. Every decision mattered. Every mistake could cost a life. And nature wasn't something to dominate. It was something to listen to. In Alaska, the land itself has always been understood as alive. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, alive. Rivers weren't just water. Mountains weren't just rock. Forests weren't empty spaces between destinations. They were presences. And because of that, there were rules. Rules about where you could go, when you could travel, what you should never do alone. But most importantly, what you should never follow. Many of the stories passed down weren't meant to entertain. They weren't myths in the way we think of myths today. They were warnings, cautionary teachings wrapped in a story, designed to keep people alive in a land that offered no second chances. Stories about voices in the wilderness, about things that mimic the familiar, about spirits that test whether you know better than to answer when your name is called. Because in these traditions, not everything that sounds human is human. The land doesn't reward curiosity. It rewards respect. Elders warned that if you hear your name called from the trees, and no one should be there, you don't listen, you don't answer, you don't investigate, and you for sure do not follow. You keep moving, you stay with your group, and you do not look back. These weren't ghost stories told around fires for fun. They were survival knowledge, the kind you pass down when the environment itself can turn deadly without warning. And as modern settlers arrived, gold rush prospectors, trappers, missionaries, explorers, many of them ignored these warnings. They brought maps instead of listening, confidence instead of caution. And Alaska did what it has always done. It reminded people who was in control. The same themes appear again and again across regions and tribes that never interacted. Voices in the wilderness, things that lure you away from safety, the danger of responding to something that knows your name. Different stories, different names, the same rule. Do not follow what calls you. Because in Alaska, the land doesn't need to hunt. It only needs you to take one step in the wrong direction. If you draw a line between Anchorage, Juneau, and Utqiagvik, you create a massive stretch of wilderness known as the Alaska Triangle. It's not marked on official maps. There are no warning signs, no borders you can see. But step inside and people disappear. Thousands of people have disappeared. Pilots, hunters, hikers, families, children, Some vanish mid-sentence. Some mid-flight. Some a few hundred yards from safety. And most are never found. This region accounts for a staggering number of missing persons cases. So many that even seasoned search and rescue teams will admit something here doesn't behave the way it should. Weather changes without warning. Clear skies collapse into whiteout conditions in minutes. Winds shift directions instantly. Visibility drops to nothing. And when the weather hits, navigation stops making sense. Compasses spin, GPS units fail, radios dissolve into static. Pilots have reported their instruments going dark mid-flight. No distress call, no mayday, just silence. Small aircrafts disappear from radar completely. No debris fields, no fuel slicks, no emergency beacons. As if the sky simply opens. Search teams are dispatched. Helicopters sweep valleys. Ground crews comb forests, glaciers, and riverbanks. And they find nothing. No wreckage, no tracks, no signs of a struggle or survival attempt. Just untouched wilderness. As if no one was there at all. One of the most unsettling patterns inside the Alaska Triangle is who disappears. These aren't careless tourists. These are experienced outdoorsmen, people raised on this land, trained pilots, hunters who know how to survive weeks in brutal conditions. Men and women who leave camp for a short trip to check traps, scout terrain, or hike an unknown trail, and never return. No signs they were lost, no emergency shelters built, no fire pits, no clothing scraps, just absence. Then there's the children. Cases where a child wanders off, sometimes for minutes, sometimes even just seconds. And when they're found, they're miles away. Across rivers, over terrain adults struggle to cross. Some are discovered unharmed, barefoot, calm, unable to explain how they got there. Others are never found at all. Searchers will tell you the same thing. The distance doesn't make sense. The time frames don't work. The survival odds are impossible. And yet, sometimes the children say they weren't alone. Inside the Alaska Triangle, bodies are rarely recovered. When they are, the condition often raises more questions than answers. No signs of exposure, no animal predation, no injuries consistent with the environment itself. Sometimes the body is placed somewhere that was already searched. Sometimes it's positioned. Sometimes it's missing key items, boots, jackets, tools, things no one would willingly abandon in sub-zero wilderness. Search and rescue veterans quietly admit something unnerves them most. The land feels wrong. Sound doesn't travel the way it should. Distance feels distorted. Time slips. Radios malfunction only in certain valleys. Dogs refuse to track past invisible lines. Experienced teams turn around without knowing why, and realizing later that they were walking straight into danger. Official explanations point to extreme weather, rugged terrain, and human error. And yes, Alaska is dangerous, but danger leaves evidence. Avalanches leave debris. Falls leave broken branches. Crashes leave wreckage. The Alaska Triangle often leaves nothing. Which is why locals don't talk about it like a mystery. They talk about it like a boundary. A place where the rules stop applying. Where the land decides whether you continue. Because inside the triangle, it doesn't matter how prepared you are. It matters whether you're allowed to leave. And that brings us to the part no report can explain. Because sometimes Alaska doesn't just erase you. Sometimes it leaves something behind. On the southern edge of the Kenai Peninsula, tucked along a quiet bay, there used to be a fishing village called Port Chatham. It wasn't large, it wasn't wealthy, and it wasn't isolated by Alaska standards. Families lived here. Children grew up here. Boats came and went. And for the first time, everything was normal. Until it wasn't. By the early 1900s, residents began reporting things that didn't fit accidents, wildlife, or rumor. People didn't just go missing, they were taken. Men walking alone near the edge of the town were dragged into the woods. Not attacked in the open, pulled backward into the trees. Screams fouled, then nothing. Search parties went out. Sometimes they came back empty-handed. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they found bodies, torn apart, not scavenged, not partially eaten, not consistent with bears or wolves. The damage didn't make sense. At night, the town didn't sleep. People reported hearing screams echo from the forest. Long, human screams that cut off suddenly. Doors were barred. Lights were kept on. No one walked alone. And still, it kept happening. One account describes a man disappearing just steps from his house. Another tells of a body found broken in a way that suggested strength far beyond any human. The fear wasn't sudden. It was consistent. And that consistency is what finally broke the town. By the 1950s, Port Chatham was abandoned. Not gradually, not economically. People left because they believed something there was hunting them. They didn't return. Today, Port Chatham is classified as a ghost town, but visitors say it doesn't feel empty. Boaters who anchor offshore report an immediate sense of being watched. Not later, not after dark. Immediately. Shadowy figures have been seen at the tree line, tall, unmoving, just beyond where the forest thickens. Voices have been heard along the shoreline, not shouting, not whispering, calling, sometimes sounding like someone you know. Footsteps echo where no one is walking. Movement appears in peripheral vision and vanishes when you turn. And the feeling, the overwhelming, undeniable feeling that you're not supposed to be there. What makes Port Chatham different isn't the violence. It's the agreement. Accounts span decades, different families, different backgrounds. The details change, but the core doesn't. Something in the woods, something strong, something territorial. Theories exist, but none are confirmed. Some believe it was a predatory presence, something physical, intelligent, and capable of learning patterns. Others believe the land itself was disturbed. That settlement awakened something that has always been there. And some locals don't theorize at all. They'll only tell you this. The town didn't leave because of fear. It left because fear was justified. Because whatever was there didn't want to share. Port Chatham isn't a mystery that begs to be solved. It's a warning that was listened to. People didn't stay to investigate. They didn't push their luck. They didn't demand answers. They left. And Alaska let them go. But not all places do. Some spirits warn you to stay away. Others try to lure you closer. Along Alaska's southeastern coast, near rivers, inlets, and cold, dark water, there are stories that are not told lightly. Among the Tlingit and other indigenous people, there is a being known as the Kushtaka, sometimes translated as the Otter Man. It isn't a monster in the way we imagine monsters. It doesn't roar. It doesn't change. It calls. The Kushtaka is described as a shapeshifter, something that moves between forms, sometimes human, sometimes animal, sometimes something in between. Those who claim to have seen it describe the features that don't align. Eyes that reflect wrong, movements too fluid, a body that never quite matches what it's pretending to be. But most encounters don't begin with sight. They begin with sound. People hear their name called near the water's edge. A familiar voice, a sibling, a friend, maybe a partner. Sometimes it sounds like someone in distress. A woman crying, a child calling for help. The instinct to respond is immediate. Survivors say the moment they hear the voice, something changes. Their thoughts feel heavy. Time becomes slippery. They feel drawn, not chased. Some report stepping toward the sound without realizing it. Others describe a fog settling in, as if the world narrows to just the voice and the water. And then, missing time. Hours gone. Memories fragmented. A few wake up far from where they started, soaked, disoriented, and unable to explain how they survived. Others were never found. Those who do escape often describe seeing something at the edge of their vision, a figure that was almost human, almost animal, standing too still, watching. In these stories, the Kushtaka isn't random. It targets people who are alone, people who are grieving, people who are vulnerable. And it uses familiarity as a weapon. That's why the warnings matter. Because these stories aren't shared as entertainment. They're shared as rules. Rules meant to keep people alive. Don't follow voices, no matter how real they sound. Don't approach water alone. And if you hear crying where no one should be, run. Don't answer. Don't look back. Don't convince yourself you're being cruel. Kindness in these moments can be fatal. What makes the Kushtaka so unsettling isn't how it looks. It's what it understands. It knows we respond to need. It knows we trust familiar voices. It knows that in silence, we're desperate to connect. And Alaska provides the perfect stage. Cold water, limited visibility, long stretches of isolation. A place where help is far away and hesitation is deadly. The Kushtaka doesn't need to attack. It just needs you to take one step closer to the water. Because once you do, the land takes care of the rest. By this point, Alaska already feels watched. The wilderness listens, the land responds, and some things call your name. So this is usually where someone asks the question, what if not everything strange in Alaska comes from the land itself? What if some of it comes from us? Outside the small town of Kokona, Alaska, there's a research facility known as HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. Officially, HAARP exists to study the ionosphere, the upper layer of the Earth's atmosphere. It's a scientific installation. Rows of antenna arrays, controlled experiments, government oversight. Nothing supernatural, nothing secret. At least, that's the explanation. But for decades, HAARP has been at the center of speculation, not because of what it claims to do, but because of what people believe it could do. Conspiracy theories suggest HAARP is capable of influencing weather patterns, disrupting communications, and interfering with navigation systems. Some go further, suggesting it can affect human behavior, perception, or even consciousness. And in Alaska, a place already known to sudden weather shifts, navigation failure, and disorientation. Those ideas take root easily. People point to the timing. Unexplained storms form too quickly. Aircraft instruments failing without mechanical cause. Radios dissolving into static mid-transition. Stories of search and rescue teams losing signal in specific regions. Pilots reporting spatial confusion. Locals noticing strange atmospheric activity. Lights, sound, or pressure changes. Individually, none of it proves anything. But together, it makes people uncomfortable. Especially when you remember where HAARP is located. Alaska. One of the most geophysically active places on Earth. A region known for auroras, magnetic anomalies, and atmospheric extremes. A perfect laboratory. Some theories suggest HAARP doesn't create anomalies, it amplifies what's already there. That it interacts with natural forces we don't fully understand. And that interaction, intentional or not, may bleed into the environment, into weather, into navigation, into people. And here's where the conspiracy folds back into the supernatural. Because many of the phenomena people associate with HAARP, confusion, lost time, distorted perception, mirror the same experiences reported in the Alaska Triangle, near Port Chatham, near water, near places where voices call from nowhere. Others believe HAARP has nothing to do with spirits or entities at all. They believe the land reacts to disturbance. That Alaska, when pushed too far, when tested, prodded, or exploited, pushes back. And that some of the disappearances, the fear, the sense of being watched, aren't accidents. They're side effects. To be clear, there is no proof HAARP causes disappearances. No evidence it controls minds or opens doorways. No confirmation of anything beyond atmospheric research. But conspiracy theories don't survive on proof. They survive on patterns, on unanswered questions, on coincidences that stack too neatly, on the feeling that something doesn't sit right. And Alaska is very good at making people feel that way. Whether HAARP is a misunderstood research facility, a convenient scapegoat, or something interacting with forces we don't fully grasp, depends on who you ask. But once you've heard the stories, once you've listened to the warnings, it becomes hard to believe everything strange here is purely natural. Because Alaska already teaches one lesson very, very clearly. Not everything that affects you is visible. And not everything that listens comes from the woods. By now, Alaska doesn't feel like a place you visit. It feels like a place you encounter. We've talked about disappearances that leave no trace. about towns that emptied because staying no longer felt possible, about voices that sound like love and mean something else entirely, and about the uneasy idea that human interference may be stirring forces we don't fully understand. And none of these stories contradict each other. They overlap. The warnings from indigenous cultures, the patterns inside the Alaska Triangle, the terror settled over Port Chatham, the rule that repeats again and again. Do not foul what calls you. What's unsettling isn't whether any single explanation is true. It's that Alaska doesn't require one. The land itself is dangerous enough. Isolation warps judgment. Cold erases margins for error. And yet, that doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain how people vanish without signs of struggle, how children cross impossible distances, how bodies appear where they shouldn't be, how voices know your name. Alaska doesn't announce itself as hostile. It waits until you're alone, until you're tired, until you trust the sound you hear. And then it tests whether you've been listening. Some places are haunted by what happened there. Alaska feels haunted by what could happen, by what almost happened, by what didn't leave evidence behind, by what may still be waiting. And maybe that's why so many people who've spent time in the wilderness here say the same thing. Even those who don't believe in the paranormal, they say Alaska feels aware. Not angry, not evil, just attentive. As if the land is always asking a quiet question. Are you paying attention? Because in Alaska, survival isn't about strength. It's about restraint. And knowing when not to answer, when not to investigate, when to walk away without needing to understand why. If you take anything from tonight's journey, let it be this. Not every mystery wants to be solved. Not every voice deserves a response. Not every silence is empty. Some silence are warnings. If you have a story connected to Alaska or anywhere else, a moment you still can't explain, a place you won't return to, or a voice you heard when no one should have been there, you're not alone. You can submit your stories to hexes, haunts, and howls at gmail.com. Again, that's hexes, haunts, and howls, all one word, at gmail.com. All stories will remain anonymous. Thank you for listening to Hexes, Haunts, and Howls. I'm your host, Cupcake. Until next time, stay sweet.